So our next speaker will be Vesna Boglev. She has a BA in English Language and English Literature and started working in healthcare as a professionally accredited translator in English to Macedonian and Macedonian to English. She has been involved in research activities on healthcare interpreting, including issues of training, best practice in utilising interpreters, as well as work health safety issues for interpreters in healthcare. In 2012, she took part in the review of the AUSIT Code of Ethics and Code of Conduct for interpreters and translators as a member of the working group. Her current role is Manager of Contract Interpreters, Research and Training, and a recent addition to her portfolio has been managing the Health Translation Unit within the Health Languages Services for Southwestern Sydney LHD. Welcome, Vesna.
Thank you, Lydia. And thank you, Anne, if you're listening, for prompting this conference. It got certainly us thinking about horror scenarios that suddenly we all become obsolete as translators, but certainly prompted us to think about welcoming the change, which is definitely inevitable. I'm also a translator practitioner, but my perspective today will be from an agency point of view. Health Translation Unit sits in the Healthcare Interpreter Service in the southwestern Sydney. And I thought, why do I have to have a balanced view about this topic? I decided to start from a horror end scenario of the spectre and build from there. I have no knowledge and no experience in machine translation myself, and I don't really know whether my translators use translation tools or translation memory as a supporting tool in their translation practice. I don't have that information. So why have I decided to actually talk about translation in this forum? I thought I'll just give you a screenshot, literally, a screenshot of what we do and what does our practice look like, because we are deeply immersed into the community translation in health. And maybe just raise questions that being literally ignorant about machine translation, I would love to have them answered, or maybe gain knowledge from this forum, starting maybe from today onwards, to get those questions answered. The types of translation documents that we receive at the Health Translation Unit are with limited usability, and by that I mean they usually pertain to individual patients, their personal medical reports. They are sometimes health information campaigns of individual clinical departments, so they may not be relevant to the similar clinical department in another area. Sometimes we translate participation information for participants for health research, surveys and related information, letters to patient, and some personal letters of our staff. So that's the sort of an overview of the type of documents that we receive for translation. Just to be on the same page when we use these terms, I would like to, I don't mean to patronize people who know them, but having in mind Anne, who is on the other side of the world, these are the basic terms that we use for people who are involved in the translation process. The translator obviously becomes the person who takes care of, so the translator, obviously we know, translates text from language A to language B. The checker, who is also an accredited translator, checks for readability, appropriateness, language. We know what we mean when we talk about checker. It collaborates, they both collaborate with the translator to produce the best possible outcome of the translated text. And the proofreader, who is usually the original translator, proofreads the text that is ready for publishing. This is the ideal scenario. It doesn't happen all the time. Very often the texts that we get need to be translated only and not checked because there is no funding for that. There would be a quote, ask for a quote to be translated and checked, but not proofread. And that creates all sorts of problems. And that's why the challenges. So the current challenges that we grapple with on a daily basis at the health translation units are building language teams. I vividly remember many years ago with Terry Cheshire, literally 25 years ago, when Health Translation Unit was sitting at the ministry, that Helen had somehow developed language teams. When you are recruited as a translator, you are given the names of your team members. Every time there is a text, a translator and a checker is allocated, and you get together yourselves at your own time to discuss checking issues of the translated text, and you both agree on the final product. It's not happening like that anymore, for whatever reason. Maybe today is not the time to discuss the reasons. Then we come to the next very big challenge that is very difficult to navigate. It's the community feedback. As Uldis said, Uldis Ozolins at the recent community translation conference, he said that anybody can have an opinion and give you feedback on a translation. And that's not such a big problem if we know what we are talking about, if we are all on the same page. The community group that gives the feedback, the question is at what point of the translation process. I prefer at the beginning rather than at the end of the process, but very often it's a difficult process to navigate simply because whether it's justified or not justified, that feedback, because the usability of that text is important to us as a health translation agency, we as a default send it back for review to the translator. That is onerous on resources, obviously. Very often there is no explanation why there is a proposed change or a feedback or the reason for the feedback at this stage. Do we add value after that review to the text? It's questionable, not always. Sometimes, yes, but not always. So at the moment, following that conference, we introduced what we call checking feedback template. So I would be asking the community members who are keen to give feedback on a quality or on a particular aspect of a translation to justify why and to explain why they want something changed rather than this is wrong and this needs to be changed, because then the comments that we get after the review is sent to the translator, they say that in order to explain my choice I have to give the person a lecture why that choice has been made. And I'm talking again from a perspective of a practitioner simultaneously as an agency coordinator or manager. This takes a long time. The frustration and the emotional response is always there. Then there is a resistance to change. We don't know why. I'm not sure that if the translator is always justified to refuse the change. So it's a little bit of a difficult scenario to navigate, as I said earlier. Agencies are very keen to, as a practitioner, I have been asked to, can you change it the way they like it anyway? Why wouldn't you put Google in different way and explain why and what it means? Well, there is a shared responsibility if you are producing translated text, the responsibility by the reader as well as the responsibility of the creator of the text. If the person who reads the text, translated or not translated, does not what Google means, it is very difficult to expect the translator in that page to explain what Google means in the translation. So there is always this balance that is difficult to find in community translations. As an agency, we do not always know the target group, and maybe that's one of the shortcomings, that we need to reverse the process and start collaborating better before the text for translation, before the resource for translation has been created, and certainly give the process a little bit more cohesion before the translation is being finalized, and then backtrack based on feedback. Ursula Le Guin is an American novelist, and I like how she talks about writing and about feedback of by people who have talked about her writing style. And I find some kind of an analogy between writing and translating skills in this case. And with all great respect to the community and our potential clients, there needs to be an awareness about what language means and what translation skills mean as well. So she says people who learn to talk at 2 or so and have been practicing talking ever since feel with some justification that they know their language. But what they know is their spoken language. And she goes on to say that if they have been reading or writing, and I would say if they have been reading and translating little or not at all, they would know about translating as much as they knew when they were 2. So there has to be some level of understanding, because this devalues the role and the expertise of the translator. We need to get on board much earlier in the resource development process rather than later. Enter machine translation, and as I said, my starting point was the horror end of the scenario spectre. There were more questions that I needed to raise in this context, simply because I also am very aware that being a part of the healthcare interpreter service, that my worst image was that in an emergency department at 3 a.m. There is a case, and then the nurse has this little tablet that after Ministry of Health wins lotto. Does the ministry actually play lotto? Can they? Maybe they should. Suddenly they buy tablets or iPads, I should say, to everybody, and there is a patient that comes in and they have some questions to ask. They press the text, or write the text, press enter. They ask the cleaner if that sounds good, and off they go, because that's a possibility. And I can assure you that that's a very real possibility. And that's my scare scenario, starting point. When I say how high or how low is our tolerance rate for inaccuracy, there is Harry Huang, who had an article about machine translations. They did a study of 300 professional translators, including scholars, editors, UN senior translators, and professional translators, to test for their inaccuracy tolerance rate. As it turned out, that there are some caveats in this study. I'm happy to give you the details. The average tolerance rate for inaccuracy in human translation was 4.9, which means that the text has to be 9.5, 6 accurate before they reject it. Yeah? For machine translation, the tolerance rate was 12.9%. So somehow it seems that, yeah, it's okay. It's not that accurate, but it's a machine translation. So we work a little bit with less effort, or we accept it somehow more. And again, I'm thinking hospital setting, emergency department, or labor ward. This was translated by a computer, and if the nurse has higher tolerance rate of inaccuracy of a machine translated question, it doesn't have to be a big text, then we have a bit of a problem. That's why I thought maybe raising the questions of and understanding that we need to think of developing best practice standards, having in mind that machine translations or technology is here to stay, certainly. The quality assurance, the safeguards, the flowing effect of interpreting, as I said, the ethical questions, the qualifications and expected remuneration for accredited translators who would be checking or post-editing the text. And Melissa rightly raised that question about the fear of, are we going to be sending people to study translation and interpreting just to be checkers in the end? phrase in Latin, quo vadis, is because I remembered my Latin teacher in high school, who was, how shall I say, you had to work very hard to like him. So when he was actually supervising the playground and we wanted to sneak out from the school grounds, he would say, "Quo vadis? Where are you going?" We know that it comes from the Bible, from a religious text, but that doesn't matter. What matters is my question: where are we taking our translation profession in Australian context? I mean, we are struggling as it is to maintain some level of status, accepted status of professionalism that is not very easy to maintain. And like in no other industry, the translation industry has dropped its fees per 100 words in the last 25 years. When I started, it was 22 cents starting point per word, or $22 per 100 or part thereof words. Now we get offered for 15 cents a word. And I know that maybe languages like French or Spanish are conference level languages, so there may be sources of work in other avenues, but there are languages that are not in that league, and there will be some loss of work for these translators if we are not very careful. Establishing protocols for the community feedback when we have a machine translated text, because in the health translation unit we have received translated text in the past and I've been asked to check them. Most cases then, in most cases I should say probably, we have suggested that the text needs to be retranslated. We don't know whether it was machine translated or it was translated by a staff member, but would we want our translators to just check texts, machine translated? Like you said, it's really not a very stimulating activity. It's very difficult to check somebody else's translation, but to check machine translated text is not a great joy. And we want good translations in any case, whether it's machine or human, or with machine and combination of human translation, and we don't want good enough. And when I say that, I have in mind, again from the interpreting context, at the catheter lab where angioplasty is performed, and when the patient was just lying down and the interpreter was prepared with lead gown, and they go into the x-ray room and they begin to talk, and the interpreter turns to the doctor and says, "We've booked the wrong language. The patient speaks Afghani and I am an Arabic interpreter." Well, that's good enough. That's what the cardiologist said. Yes, that's good enough. So I know that we all here would like to have good outcomes, but yeah, be wary of good enoughs. Thank you.